Humans are naturally curious, and even as many things change over time, we never lose the ability to question what the world around us is made of. When we were children, our parents, grandparents, and teachers were the ones who made an effort to provide answers to our tireless questions. As we grew up, we discovered numerous other forms of knowledge, not only from people, but also movies, books, music, and of course, places. Each place has a story to be uncovered, and special places tell special stories. If you were to tell the story of your neighborhood, which places could not be left out? And if you were to tell the story of your life? Well, know that there are places that help tell the story of our world, of our collective heritage and history. Some of these places are so important that they are called World Heritage Sites. In this podcast, we want to introduce you to some of these places and the stories they tell us about our world today. My name is Mariana Mendez, and you are listening to an episode of Your Heritage, Your Story, a UNESCO podcast about world heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean, places that tell our stories. Episode 1, Enslaved People of African Descent, Exploring Resilience and Freedom Through World Heritage Sites. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of individual experts and do not necessarily represent the views of UNESCO or other organizations. Have you ever wondered how the meaning of some things can change over time? Imagine what it was like to live during the era of the first great navigations, in times when the sea was still a great mystery. A port was a sign of salvation for sailors. Solid ground meant the worst was over. But there was a time when, for millions of people, the port was just a new chapter of an atrocious story. The story of enslaved people brought from Africa to the Americas as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Over 3 centuries, these ports received 12 million enslaved people. And of these 12 million, about 5 million arrived in Brazil. Despite being a period that deeply marked humanity, many records of the slave trade were erased. Among these places that witnessed this dark chapter of humanity, we have the Valongo Wharf, in the harbor area of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The wharf was almost lost, but it was recovered, and is now one of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. There are other places like Valongo Wharf around the world that tell the story of this terrible period and of the struggle and liberation of these peoples. Many are part of the UNESCO Routes of Enslaved Peoples, Resistance, Liberty, and Heritage program. In today's episode, we will explore Valongo Wharf, the streets and buildings of Trinidad and the Valley de los Ingenios in Cuba, the landscapes of the Maroon resistance in the Blue and John Crow Mountains in Jamaica, and the National Historic Park, Citadel Souci Ramiers in Haiti, where a fort guards the legacy of the Haitian Revolution, the first revolution led by former slaves. First, let's visit Valongo Wharf.
And Brazil is also the last country to abolish the slave ship. Because of the archaeological work in the wharf of Rio de Janeiro, we discovered pieces of Valongo Wharf. And it's incredible, but there is not so many materials about the enslaved people port for disembark. There is a policy to extinguish and to oblige it not to remember what happened. So the Valongo Wharf becomes the only material point about the enslaved people arrival in America.
To help us present these stories throughout the episodes, we have invited experts on UNESCO's World Heritage Sites so they can share the details of each of these places with us. The voice you heard is Brazilian photographer and anthropologist Milton Guran. He was a member of the International Scientific Committee for UNESCO's Routes of Enslaved Peoples program. Created in 1994, This project supports the production of scientific knowledge and memory initiatives on the subject of slavery and its abolition. Nowadays, people document their lives all the time. What they ate, what they wore, which concert they attended, where they traveled. Most of these records are of everyday things, but some are much more important, things you really don't want to forget. Now, imagine if someone deleted all the memories and records of an event. Over time, people would forget, and it would be as if it never happened. Humanity also has its history and its decisive moments. One of these periods that influenced many things in our society today must not ever be forgotten: the transatlantic slave trade. It involved the forced labor of millions of people, creating a system of dehumanization based on racism that is fought against to this day, and was the main movement of the economy at the time, forming the social foundation of several countries in the Americas. Despite the transatlantic slave trade period lasting 3 centuries, it ran the risk of being distorted or erased.
There are so many World Heritage sites associated to the history of the transatlantic trade. And I think Milton Garand has already mentioned one which is very important in Brazil, of course, the Valongo Wharf.
This is the voice of Lazar Elondo Asomo, director of UNESCO's World Heritage Center.
There are many associated to slavery in America, but also in Africa. And in Africa, there are so many. Some of them are known over the world. The island of Gore, where the slave left Africa for the transatlantic place. Or you have the island of Zanzibar in Tanzania, also on the other side of the continent. And you also have in Ghana the Cape Coast, with the more than 10, 15 castles that are associated to the history of slaves. And of course, they are so important because they still bear, it's a way of making those sites being, to tell the history, to tell the story, so that this story cannot be forgotten and could be used also as education place for the next generation to remember what happened so that it doesn't happen, and to build the conscience of the danger that it is to enslave the people.
Brazil is no different from other countries that practice the slave trade. Enslaved workers contributed to building their economy and eventually their identity.
In Brazil, more than a half of the population feels like black people. And that population has been submitted to a structural racism during all this, since Brazil has been built as a nation.
Therefore, Brazil proposing to UNESCO to make the Valongo Wharf a World Heritage Site was an extremely important and transformative act in favor of its African heritage.
And the site of Valongo and others, material and immaterial heritage, they give a sense of what Mr. Elondo said, that is the conscience of the past. Who I am, who I was, I used to be, and who I am now. So if I know who I used to be, I can imagine, I can find out who I am now, and I can think about how can I be, what can I do in the future. Well, this is the meaning of World Heritage.
And when World Heritage sites are particularly associated to the history of transatlantic slavery, they raise the same question. So the visitors, when they come, they are definitely brought to an environment where the World Heritage will tell the history and the story, as I was saying, about what happened. And then everyone will start putting itself and imagining what happened during the time of the slavery, how were the people kept in so small places, how they were so badly treated, what happened to them. In fact, World Heritage are places to raise awareness, as you have been saying. And Professor Milton rightly put it clearly, because then it questions yourself about the history of our humanity. But it also makes you feel what UNESCO means through World Heritage as being universal. What is the message of universality? It's about this kind of message where you raise awareness and make people feel exactly what is humanity today. And World Heritage are meant for that.
The transformative power mentioned by Lazare Londua Somo is related to the fact that in Brazil, as in some other countries that experienced colonization, the erasure generated difficulty among descendants of the enslaved. They faced challenges in assessing their history, becoming aware of the journey their ancestors had to undergo until they achieved freedom. The preservation of memory is fundamental. African people built Brazil, and the Valongo Wharf is a symbol of that. It carries the emotional strength of the struggle against racism and the suffering generated by slavery.
Well, as I said, Valongo Wharf is a wharf. The stones are there. So it's a reference of disembarking people. And so it's material. But it's also intangible because of what we just said. It means suffering. It means that people lost their freedom. And it's a symbol of something that the humanity accept.
The humanity no longer accept this history. And the fact that the descendants are attached to these places helps them, reconnect with their past. And so it is important to allow them to have this connection by going back to the place where their history started so that they understand it.
The Valongo Wharf is not only important for the emotion it evokes, but also because it makes us ask, how did this happen? And it is also an answer. This should never happen again. Therefore, places like the Valongo Wharf offer not only a space for reconnecting with memory and reflecting on history, but also serve as landmarks of resistance. Now, let's explore some other sites that also form part of the route of enslaved peoples and are living memories of the abolition struggle. We are now leaving the port and heading to a valley in Cuba with a beautiful natural landscape. Here lies the city of Trinidad, and to the north and east of the city is the Valley de los Ingenios, a location that is one of the landmarks of the route of enslaved peoples.
Well, the main legacy of the slave trade is complex, because from the demographic perspective, it is one of the components. The population of African origin is one of the fundamental components of the Cuban population.
The voice you just heard is Alicia Garcia Santana.
Good morning. My name is Alicia Garcia Santana. I have been working for many years, my whole life, in the service of research, conservation, and promotion of Cuban heritage. Specifically, I have focused on studying cities, housing, and urban areas. Some of the places where I have done extensive work include the city of Trinidad, which is one of the declared World Heritage Sites.
Let's hear about the city of Trinidad and the Valley de los Ingenios in Cuba.
It is a joy to be at this stage of the journey, continuing to contribute to a cause that we consider truly important, the conservation of our heritage, both our own and that of our country and every single country in general. Heritage encompasses the context of life, cities, and homes. It's the environment where life unfolds and has a significant influence on human happiness.
One of the oldest cities in the Americas, Trinidad was founded in 1514. The city experienced slow development in its early centuries due to being attacked by pirates like all Caribbean cities and coastal towns.
In the late 18th century and early decades of the 19th century, there was significant economic growth due to the development of the sugar industry, which was one of the pillars of the Cuban economy.
And, as is known, sugar and slavery were inseparable businesses during this period.
The dehumanizing process of the slave trade in the country occurred in the late 18th century and early 19th century, which is when Cuba properly entered the system of slave plantations.
It was during this economic leap that Trinidad acquired the architecture that still stands today. This period came to an end with the abolition of slavery, marking the beginning of a new phase for the city.
And at that time, the city acquired the features it has today. This was due to the development of the area and the collapse of the valley's sugar industry, as well as the ending of the Cuban slave system. By the mid-19th century, this had become a significant obstacle to development and one of the country's major problems. Trinidad was left in ruins, isolated by its mountains, practically separated from the rest of the country, and plunged into poverty. It's the lack of resources that led to the preservation of its urban and architectural heritage. In other words, the city froze in time entering the 20th century, with the essential characteristics of a colonial-era nucleus, represented by its urban planning, cobbled streets, and original sidewalks.
While the Valongo Wharf is an important record of the arrival of enslaved individuals, the Valley de los Ingenios is a living testament to the labor of the enslaved and the wealth they produced, without being able to enjoy any of it for themselves. At the peak of its growth, it is believed that over 11,000 enslaved individuals worked in the mills of Trinidad. Today, the site still preserves the 75 former sugar mills, mill houses, and barracks, among other facilities.
Represented by the most important landmark buildings within the city's urban structure, Trinidad's architecture consists of domestic houses, grand palaces, large homes, modest dwellings, and traditional houses. Additionally, a crucial aspect that characterizes Trinidad is its relationship with the surrounding landscape.
Trinidad maintains its connection with the landscape, the mountains, and the sea practically unchanged. This was crucial for the city to be declared a World Heritage Site in 1988. Years earlier, in 1982, the first Cuban city to be declared a World Heritage Site was Havana and its fortification system, which was essential for the inscription of Trinidad and the Valley de los Ingenios that followed. Indeed, it's a good time to extend an invitation. The links for more information and to view photos of the places discussed here are in the episode description. But the city's significance goes beyond its architecture and landscape. As in Brazil, the presence of people of African descent became part of the construction of the Cuban identity, blended with the arrival of people from other parts of the world, as Alicia comments.
The Cuban people, ethnically speaking, are composed of contributions from diverse human lineages originating from Europe and Africa. Additionally, we also have, at least in our blood, remnants of the pre-Hispanic population, the indigenous population of Cuba. In reality, and of course, the country's culture, from a historical perspective, has been shaped by the generous contributions of each of these lineages.
This union of different ethnic groups created a sort of cultural exchange that later was named transculturation. The Cuban thinker Fernando Ortiz coined the term. The Valley de los Ingenios is a well-preserved testimony of the 18th and 19th century sugar industry in the Caribbean, and consequently, of the slavery process associated with this business.
that which emerges from the long-term coexistence of different groups, different cultures, and different origins, resulting in something new, something created through the process of transculturation between one and the other. In my view, this is what has happened with Cuban culture. The Cuban culture is a culture of transculturation, blending all these lineages, primarily influenced by African and Hispanic elements.
In other words, what can be called the Cuban identity is a result of what emerged from this peculiar condition, according to Alicia.
I couldn't identify a single cultural or human attitude that would be exclusive to a particular group.
For example, in some parts of Cuban culture, it's easy to recognize the strength of Hispanic influence, while in others, such as in musical and dance culture, you can observe more of the African influence.
The process of national integration in Cuba is unique. Despite being a small island without significant geographical differences, the process of transculturation occurred. This process transcended socio-economic disparities, the horrors of slavery, and the roles played by different groups, some as slaveholders and others as slaves. Despite all these complexities, Cuban culture has ultimately undergone an enrichment through the contributions of each of these lineages. In essence, Cuban identity is not confined to specific groups. It is a collective fusion of diverse influences.
Of course, Alicia's not saying that there was a positive consequence of the horror of slavery, but rather, due to the presence of different peoples in Cuba, which is a small island country without very distinct regions like larger countries, it brought about a set of cultural exchanges. This included, but was not limited to, people who were enslaved from the African continent. And from these exchanges emerged Cuban culture, which is unique, vibrant, and recognized worldwide. But now it's time to move from Cuba to another country in the Caribbean, Jamaica. We have talked about the arrival of enslaved people in the Americas and their forced labor. Now, let's learn about a place that served as both shelter and resistance, the Blue and John Crow Mountains.
Hello, I'm Dr. Susan Otuokan, and up to the end of May 2023, I was the Executive Director of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, the non-government organization responsible for managing the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park and World Heritage Site.
Dr. Otuokan worked as the park manager from 2002 to 2019, overseeing day-to-day tasks. In July 2015, she witnessed the Blue and John Crow Mountains become a UNESCO World Heritage Site for their extraordinary natural and cultural value. It is indeed a unique place.
The natural heritage comprises over 26,000 hectares of primary tropical broadleaf cloud forest, over 1,000 meters and going up to 2,256 meters in elevation. This does not exist anywhere else in Jamaica or the Caribbean.
What makes this place so special is the direct link between its natural features and its cultural value. Thanks to its forests, terrain type, and natural resources like rivers and high biodiversity, the Blue and John Crow Mountains provided protection and shelter for Maroons to establish their culture, a true natural fortress. This gave rise to one of the most impressive stories of enslaved resistance in the world. But before we delve into how this happened,
first, a little bit of the history of the Maroons in Jamaica. Jamaica was first ruled in terms of colonial powers from about 1494 by the Spanish. By 1513, the original inhabitants of the island, the Tainos, had been pretty much decimated.
There is historical evidence that the few surviving Taino indigenous people, after the Spanish colonization, fled to the Blue and John Crow Mountains.
Now, the Spanish then needed to bring in enslaved Africans to play a role on their small farms and also to care for pigs and cattle that they had in the hilly areas. And so they began to bring those persons in. But very shortly afterwards, they began to escape into the mountains, and that's how they became known as the Maroons.
By around 1640, there were already two Maroon groups in the mountains, the Windwards and the Leewards. However, in 1655, the British captured Jamaica from the Spanish, leading to more escaping slaves and a significant increase in the overall Maroon population.
Later on, by around the 1720s, they were extending the sugarcane plantations, and this included into the eastern portion of the island, where the Blue and John Crow Mountains are the main range. The Maroons, however, had already occupied and were farming in these areas, and so they were determined to maintain their freedom, their land, the sovereignty of their land, and that eventually led to the Maroon Wars between 1728 and 1739.
The terrain of the mountains was difficult to access, which was a fundamental advantage for the Maroons in resisting British fleets. Additionally, the Maroons developed guerrilla techniques for defense and survival, living off local resources. These techniques included knowledge from the indigenous people who first sought refuge in the mountains and was passed down to the Maroons through cultural exchange. After years of conflicts with the British, a treaty was finally signed, granting autonomy to the Maroons on their lands. The resistance of the Maroons became a beacon of hope for all enslaved individuals.
The indomitable spirit of the Maroons provided an inspiration for those enslaved persons who were really seeking their freedom. This inspiration, this hope that the Maroons provided was one that, led the enslaved Africans to believe that it was possible for them to obtain their freedom. It also provided an actual space where they felt that if they could manage to get through the forest and mountains to the places that the Maroons lived, they would be able to have a place that they could truly be free.
Within this spreading hope, one person in particular became a symbol of resistance for oppressed peoples worldwide. She is known as Nanny of the Maroons, Queen Nanny.
The Maroons, and especially Queen Nanny today, represent for Jamaicans the importance of fighting for what you believe in: freedom, sovereignty, and the right to rule yourselves. Queen Nanny in particular is an inspiration for women and a symbol of gender equality. She is seen as a strong woman who cared for her people and was prepared to fight and use all the tools she possessed to secure their freedom, sovereignty, and their livelihoods.
This is why this place has immeasurable value and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The same space that provided shelter for indigenous people became a site of resistance for the Maroons. Over the time they remained in the area, these peoples integrated with nature and preserved the environment, knowing they depended on it for survival. The winds of the Blue and John Crow Mountains still have much to say to new generations.
The Nanny Town Cultural Heritage Route is comprised of one major trail and several other trails, some connected, some interconnected, and others not. Many of them around the existing Maroon communities that have been in use for hundreds of years and still in use today. And those trails represent places where Maroons would go to collect spring water, where they would go for hunting of different types of wildlife, including in the streams where they would go to catch shrimp and fish. And so they're very important to the culture of the Maroons, as well as recalling and recounting their history at different places along these routes and trails. Today, they are recognizing how they could use these trails for recreation and tourism, and the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust is working to establish appropriate businesses for the Maroon communities to help them to improve livelihoods.
The treaty was signed in 1739, guaranteeing autonomy for the Maroons in the Blue and John Crow Mountains. Several decades later, in another location, a slave rebellion would go down in history. Let's head there now to the final part of our first episode.
History has witnessed many insurrections and revolutions, but only one nation has emerged from a slave uprising, the Republic of Haiti.
This is the voice of Patrick Delatour.
And I am practicing architect specialized in conservation of buildings and heritage importance. I obtained a bachelor's degree of architecture from Howard University and a master's degree in science of historic preservation from Columbia University in New York. I have been an architect of monuments in Haiti since 1974, working at the Palace of Souci and the Citadel Henry, and an active architect of ISPAN, the agency responsible for the preservation of monuments and sites of the country.
The site is the National Historic Park, Citadel Souci Ramiers, in Haiti, and the milestone is the Haitian Revolution. Several things make the Haitian Revolution so unprecedented. The French colony of Saint-Domingue was considered one of the richest colonies of the time, thanks to the large production of sugar and coffee achieved with the labor of enslaved people from the African continent. However, in France, in 1789, an immensely notable event in history began: the French Revolution, aimed at ending the monarchy and the privileges of the nobility. The slogan of its ideals is popular to this day: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Well, liberty, equality, and fraternity are not ideas that align with slavery. So, in 1791, influenced by the French Revolution and opposed to the terrible working conditions and brutality of slavery, the slaves of Saint-Domingue revolted. Leaders like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe were crucial in the process. While the Haitian Revolution was happening, the rest of the world was in a tumultuous moment. Countries like France, Spain, and England, which were then the world's major powers, tried to control the island, making everything even more complicated. Only on January 1st, 1804, after years of struggle, the revolutionaries, led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, declared independence, creating Haiti, the world's first black republic. The Haitian Revolution, occurring at a time when slavery was still very prevalent globally, was extremely important for influencing other independence movements worldwide.
To secure its new independence, Haiti built a system of fortification on its highest mountain peaks. The masterwork of this system is the Citadel Henry, one of the most extraordinary fortresses in the world. It serves as a monument to slaves' freedom everywhere and to black men's dignity in every country.
The National Historic Park, Citadel Souci Ramiers in Haiti, inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1982, was constructed by slaves who had gained their freedom and represents Haiti's struggle for independence and the abolition of slavery. It covers an area of 25 square kilometers and has three main parts: the Souci Palace, the Citadel Henry, and the buildings of Ramiers. The construction of the Citadel itself was an impressive act.
Citadel Henry emerges from the clouds. In this heroic setting, Henri Christophe, the slave who became king, galvanized the superhuman toil of 20,000 men to create this most extraordinary fortress of our time, the first monument to the black man's freedom.
The Citadel could accommodate up to 5,000 men and was the main residence of King Henri Christophe until his death in 1820. Its ruins blend different styles of architecture and bear the symbol of the strength of a nation that emerged from the rebellion of enslaved people. Patrick tells how the national park was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
That classification was based on two criteria. Criteria 4, the site offers an eminent example of a type of construction or an architectural and technological ensemble, plus a natural environment that witness to one or more significant periods of human history. Criteria 6, directly and materially associated to events, living traditions, ideas, beliefs, or artistic and literary works having exceptional universal significance and value.
It's important to mention that preservation projects include improvements in infrastructure that affect local communities.
The ISPA UNESCO United Nations Development Program project is based on an interdisciplinary approach to the preservation, restoration, and development of the monumental complex within the national park. The principal goals of the projects are the restoration of Citadel Henry and the Palace of Souci, the consolidation of the site of Ramiers, the adaptive use of the Citadel Henry and the Palace of Souci, the improvement of the roads between Milo and the Citadel, the training of architects, technicians, draftsmen, masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and craftsmen in the art of restoration and preservation.
It is symbolic that the World Heritage Site that concludes our journey is a fortress built by former slaves and restored today by local architects and builders. Memory needs to be preserved and stories need to be told. They hold our history, give meaning to our present, and empower us for the future. This was the first episode of Your Heritage, Your Story, supported by the Government of Brazil and UNESCO. I am Mariana Mendez. This episode was produced, edited, and scripted by Ricardo Terto in co-production with Lillian Cais. Production support was provided by Diogo Carvalho. The interview with Milton Guran and Lazaro Lunduasomo was conducted by Rochelle Roca. The interview with Alicia Garcia Santos, Susan Otuokon, and Patrick Delatour was conducted by Lillian Cais. Coordination was led by Rochelle Roca. The voices of the experts were dubbed by Rochelle Roca and David Stell. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of individual experts and do not necessarily represent the views of UNESCO or other organizations. We'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.